What's up, guys? Welcome back again to the Babbling Pastor Podcast, the only podcast you'll ever need for all aspects of life. Part of the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel. So why would you go anywhere else? I'm your host, Michael, and here's your host,
Rob. Hey, so this month I'm actually going to ask the questions, and then we're both going to deal with the answers. All right? Because so this is the why. So it's confession time, right? So the why is that we were talking yesterday, and yesterday afternoon.
It was late afternoon.
Late afternoon for you. Yeah. And we were both kind of like, what do we talk about tomorrow?
we gotta record tomorrow. I'm telling you what, we set the bar for preparedness. I mean,
yeah.
No one's more prepared than us. That's a terrible Donald Trump impression.
Donald Duck.
I couldn't remember his last name. This is where I'm at right now. So
Yeah.
don't remember the former president's name.
Fun endeavor this morning. But first, so here's what happened. So we were talking about this, and then I just happened to have my sister in my house, my mother and stepfather in the house, and my wife obviously was right there as well. And so I said, "Hey, what do we talk about tomorrow?" And so my family, at least the family that was in the room at the time, threw out some questions for us. So this is questions from Rob's Family Month. But first, I have a surprise for Michael that he doesn't know about.
Okay.
We're gonna ask an initial and simpler question every episode this month before we get into the real question from my family.
Okay.
And the initial question is,
oh, hey, free advertisement, guys, from Don't Ask Those Questions.
what is the best sermon you have ever heard?
Oh, man. Well, there was one from Joel Osteen that I just feel...
Okay, close it. We're done. I'm out.
Best sermon ever. Man. I'll tell you, I'm going to go with best sermon, like, snippet ever. Because I can't think of the best sermon ever right now. I'm trying to go through my head. But the one that I'm thinking of currently was the one that Alistair Begg gave about the thief on the cross. And he goes through that whole... Yeah, he goes through the whole thing where, the guy gets to heaven and he's like, "Why are you here?" He's like, the man in the middle said I could come. And so I think that clip right there, it's been kind of making the rounds, which is probably why it's in the front of my mind. But that is a really good, I think, 10-minute snippet of a sermon from somebody that you could probably literally pick out any of their sermons, Alistair Begg, and you're going to get a solid one every single time. So that's what's in the front of my mind right now. When I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So for me, I just picked that card out.
Well, that's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to prep.
I don't have like a prepared answer for this. But the thing that comes to mind for me, and this is going to be, there are over the years, obviously, and especially over the millennia, there have been literally millions of ridiculously great sermons. So to pick one, the best sermon that I've ever heard is, I think, impossible. But the one that I think most recently in life has had a I'll say profound effect on me was Steve Lawson at the Ligonier Conference 2 years ago. The Ligonier Conference in March of 2021. He preached from Timothy. It was really all about preach the word, preacher, right? And so it was directed specifically toward pastors or preachers, and the application for the lay person in the chairs at the time was, you need to be under this kind of preaching. But it was, just crazy good, powerful, in your face, like
what was it
typical
called?
Lawson.
Preach the word.
Well, I don't know if that was the title of it or not. But
okay, well, yeah, we'll figure it out.
yeah, but it super super good. And I was there, which adds to it.
Well, yeah, you actually got to see it in person. What in the world?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So it was yeah, super convicting. I actually leaned over to my wife about 3/4 of the way through it and said, "I need to quit my job, like, because
I'm not good at this.
I'm never gonna be able to live up to what he's."
Okay, little glitch there. Keep going.
Glitches get stitches.
What? We're so
So pick up the computer and throw it across the. Yeah, I don't. That would not be cool.
I don't think that really fixes the problem we're having.
No, that's classic moment of acting on impulse that makes you feel good for a split second, and then you realize, oh my gosh, that was $2,000.
Yeah, look at that, just like sin.
Yep. Anyway, so that sermon to me was just a killer sermon. So if you, I mean, and you can find it pretty easy. If you got on YouTube and searched Ligonier 2021 Steve Lawson, right? There were only 2 sermons that he gave, and one of them is pretty obviously the one that I am talking about.
We're talking about, yep. All right.
But okay, so the other question, right? The other question is this, and this comes from. You know what? I'm not gonna tell you which family member asks these questions, because one of them has the potential of getting one of my family members in trouble. So the first question, you'll learn about that. You'll learn about that in the 4th episode in this month. So the first question is this: is there a correct form of apologetics?
And why is presuppositional apologetics the right answer? No.
Yeah, sure.
So we were talking about this before we started pushing record. So this will show you everyone sort of where I'm at on this. I'm not an apologist, but the only apologetics I do know is presuppositional apologetics, which just basically operates out of this idea that I am coming to you with this assumption, with this belief that the Word of God is the Word of God. So I'm not proving it to you. I'm just saying this is the truth, and then going from that into sort of reasoning with you just about general morality, really, and then about who God is and what he's done. So I know there's other forms of apologetics. I didn't look them up, but I think presuppositional apologetics is sort of at least for now in our time that we're at, the general sort of default. I know there's some people that don't like it. I am in a group chat with a few people, and one of the guys has sort of talked about how he doesn't like presuppositional apologetics because of sort of how off-putting it is to some people that he's like atheists and whatnot when he enters in a conversation with them, because the assumption being that the Word of God is the basis of all authority. So that's pretty much all I know about it as far as some people's dislike of it. I just don't see the point of not arguing from a presuppositional method, because if you're going to say the Word of God is the authority and over all things, like, why would I back up even further and concede that ground when I'm talking to you about it? And I think it's fairly, I mean, like I said, I've never had any issue when I'm, not that, again, as I've already stated, I'm not an apologist in the formal expertise sense. I think we're all apologists as Christians, but I've never had an issue with it when I'm addressing people and talking to people about it, but as far as reasoning with them. So
yeah, so so I want to say one thing, and then maybe we could get into maybe a brief definition of because some folks who are going to hear this and watch it, I'm assuming people have heard the term apologetics, but maybe not a lot of people have heard even the terms of some of the different kinds of apologetics. So it might actually be new to you, the whole idea in the first place, that there are lots of different methods out there, and there are lots
Well,
of
yeah, I just
different
looked it up. Holy
methods
cow,
out
there's a
there.
lot of them.
Did you look? Are you looking at Nelson?
Yes, I am. That's exactly where I'm
Yeah,
on number 25, and they just keep going. I don't.
yeah, yeah. They have 28 listed here, but in the last paragraph, it kind of lumps some of them together and gives just a
Yeah.
few
Okay.
broad categories, which is helpful. Um, but anyway, before we get into apologetics, we should kind of maybe just preface that conversation um, with a thought or two. One being, apologetics is something that is commanded in Scripture. That Peter um, tells the believer to always be ready to give a defense of the faith, right? Or to give a defense of the hope that is in you. And so there's actually a mandate in the Scriptures for the Christian to be able to defend Christ, and the faith, and so that's why apologetics is important. That's why it's a thing that needs to be thought about and talked about in the first place, um, and and secondly, apologetics is not going to, nor has it ever saved anyone. So that's important to realize and remember too, because so often when I see people engage in any sort of whether it's on YouTube or whatever, when you see people engage in apologetics, you you can tell the difference between someone who is just with all their might attempting to convince the unbeliever of God and the gospel and all this stuff, um, and the person who is simply giving some answers to something as they lead them to the gospel, the actual truth, the truth that actually, and so the reason for apologetics isn't isn't and cannot be for us, so that we can convince them and they'll be saved by our arguments, right? That is always an act of God, which we'll get into in another question. So, um, but so with that being said, though, apologetics, presuppositional apologetics, which is what you were talking about. What is that? Is there a brief definition you could give for that,
Well,
since you're looking at it on that screen?
well, I gotta pull it up now again. My working definition of presuppositional apologetics, which I cannot seem to find. Oh, here we go. Presuppositional apologetics, in general, is the view. I'm sorry. It says that our reason. Hold on, what in the world here? I gotta find the actual. Okay, I can't go off this definition. There's so many other definitions built into this based on the other ones that they've noted in this article.
Yeah.
So, presuppositional apologetics, to my understanding, is that I am presuming that the scriptures are the foundation, and then I'm working out of that presupposition that the scriptures are the foundation. So everything mainly in presuppositional apologetics, from what I've seen and how I exercise at least, is a lot of referring back to the scriptures, a lot of pointing to Bible verses, a lot of pointing to what is said in scripture, not only necessarily the verses, but also just kind of the historical context and culture as well, and working through that. And again, it's all built on, it's in the name, presuppositional, this idea that I'm presuming that this is the basis of that, and then everything flows from that, which is why some people don't like it, because their argument is that if I'm arguing with an atheist that doesn't believe that, then that's kind of pointless then, because at that point they're not operating from the same starting point, and because of that, the argument or the discussion or argument or whatever doesn't really get that far, because we're starting from two different planets, which there's some merit to that, because whenever you are discussing, this is even true when you're talking to what I would define as like progressive Christians. This is why those arguments are also a little odd, because you're not starting from the same starting point. So whenever you operate from that apologetic, sometimes it's it can be a little difficult because of that. So, but that's my definition.
Yeah,
Hopefully I'm right.
Yeah, I think it really flows from the I think first and foremost it flows from the text too, in Romans 1. There's the idea that well, not the idea, the truth that well, I'm just going to read a couple of verses real quick. Beginning in verse 18, right? The part that gets a lot of Christians in trouble with the LGBTQ thing. But before that, in verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. And then it goes on. And so those few verses are really one of the main presuppositions, I think, within presuppositional apologetics, and that is that even the atheist, okay, or the agnostic, which even more so, the atheist makes a claim that the God of the Bible doesn't exist. Okay, the agnostic makes a claim, right? They're not sure. They don't, they can't prove anything. They can't, but Romans says explicitly that no, everybody knows that God exists. Everybody knows that he's there. They're without excuse. It's not as if he's hiding from anyone. And that's the sort of foundation of this idea that I don't necessarily have to present you with all kinds of evidence for God to exist, or for the Bible to be true, or for this or for that, or evolution isn't real, and we don't actually have to engage in all of that because they already know. Like that's the idea, right? And then you move into the actual tactic of presuppositional apologetics, but really I think it boils down to so I guess in one way, in my mind, every apologetic form is presuppositional in nature at some level, because they all have presuppositions behind them. It's just that the thing that we think about as presuppositional apologetics is the presupposition is what we've already talked about, and that's the coined presuppositional apologetics. That's kind of what it is. And so but the other ones, essentially all the rest of them are the opposite take on it, in which you present evidence or rationale of some sort to them, and have debate and argument and that sort of thing. But you're gonna say something?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is that when you're discussing something with somebody anyway, it always comes back down to figuring out where they're coming from in the first place, discovering their own presupposition on the matter. I mean, so there are going to be in every discussion you have with somebody, with whether it be like more of a formal setting or just your back and forth with somebody at work, and when this is happening, again, like I said, I think we're all apologists. I mean, and you've already know, like, this is every Christian's job, which the idea is just to do it well. And obviously we have these categories for apologetics and, all these different approaches, but at the end of the day, it's not like, I don't know if we need 28 different names as much as we just need to say, hey, like, are you engaging? And then when you engage, recognize kind of how you're approaching it. And the funny thing is, that's going to differ for everybody you talk to. I mean, so there's guys at work that I've talked to that have a pretty, intense background in church, that I'm going to approach differently. I mean, those guys don't go to church anymore, but they have a pretty good background in it. So knowing that, I'm going to approach that a bit differently. Even with, so just to give an example of two of them, some of them have like a very much more fundamentalist background, whereas some of them have more of a Pentecostal background. So even when I'm approaching those guys, I have to approach them differently. And then there's atheists and agnostics and all sorts of people at work. But this is where, like, relationally, you fill out, okay, what is their background? What is their belief system? Apologetics, for me, a lot of it, and I'm sure it's like this for everybody, it's just sort of figuring out where that other person is coming from, so that then I can properly find an inroad to approach what I'm really trying to get at, which is Jesus and who he is and what he's done. And a lot of the time, I've got to figure out what walls am I coming up against and having to crawl over to get to that, to find out what your definition of some of these words are. Because we live in an age where, like, I mean, gosh, how many backgrounds do people have? I mean, there's no two people are the same. So then, there's all sorts of, I mean, again, you could go through the whole list of apologetics names and approaches. And I think those, in a formal sense, like if I'm debating someone, that would be like super helpful. But when I'm just talking to somebody on a day-to-day, the approach is like, all right, where are you coming from? What is your background? What is your definition? And then working from that. Like, all right. And then again, like you said, I think the most helpful thing there is that we all have presuppositions and we're all working from those. So like knowing that and then approaching it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, so what you said, something you said is really important to the conversation. And I kind of barely hinted at it before when I was talking about the couple of things before we get into it. But the idea of apologetics in any fashion, at the end of the day, is that we get to the gospel. Like, because if that's not the point of apologetics, then there isn't a good one. That should be the point. The thing that really leads into all conversations that we have with unbelievers. I mean, the hope is that at some point get there. Now, there are all kinds of different philosophies and lines of thinking about that. Point being, if you're not attempting to get to the gospel, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
And the so presuppositional apologetics, I think that one of the reasons it's the most helpful is because or let me rephrase that. One of the reasons that I think it makes the most sense is because every Christian is called to give a defense, to be able to give a defense of their faith, correct? Right? From Scripture.
Correct. Yes.
How many Christians have the ability or capacity or even time to learn all of the answers to all of these ridiculous questions that come up? Let's just say evolution, or the age of the earth, or the flood, like some of those really pretty basic questions, right, from unbelievers that you get all the time. How many Christians are super fluent in that, right?
I mean, not
to a
lot.
level that you could actually debate someone. Not a lot, right? I mean, that's I think one of the difficulties with the whole thing, because we're called to be able to make a defense of the faith, and at the very same time, we aren't able to make a defense of the faith.
Well, yeah.
If that's what we're talking about.
When you have so this is, I mean, this is me up until what, 10 years ago, or maybe 15 if I'm being really generous with myself. This idea of like, well, why is this, that, or the other? So the questions that you ask, right? The flood, sin, hell. The general idea would be, well, the Bible says so. Okay, well, where? Well, I don't know, but I'll Google it. Or I'll ask my pastor.
Yeah.
And you just don't have, and then, not that this is the whole reason for the enormous deconstruction movement we see going on now, but I think it is a part of it, is that you have two storms sort of coming together into a tornado of terribleness, which is you have illiterate believers not knowing even how to even begin having discussions on this, and then you also have pastors and churches that maybe underestimated the value of training people up in a way that helped them do this well. So now you have a lot of your sermons that you have because of the seeker sensitive movement, which I have an enormous problem with, is that you have a lot of more surface level things that are talked about, but the deeper issues aren't. And then now you have people that are discipled in how to have a good marriage, but not how to give a defense for the faith. And and you have a pretty big falling away, because then you do have people that have written a lot of books that are very educated, not in the sense that they're necessarily right, but they're very convincing, that come out and be like, well, for example, hell's not real. I mean, that's just one that's in the forefront of my mind. And then you have believers that don't know how to counter that, haven't been trained or taught as far as like Jewish views on the afterlife, or how early believers believe this, or what their answers were. And so because of the bucket of information from the other side and nothing coming out of the tap on the other, you're just drowned in it. You're like, well, okay, you must be right then, because no one gave me an answer for this. And you have the unfortunate outcomes of that, which I think is why apologetics and discipleship sort of tied together there is so important, because you're going to have people that ask these questions in and outside of the church. And if you're not equipping them for that, believe me, there are plenty of people that are happy to inundate people with information that is full of half-truths, in order to sway them to a different direction. And if they don't have any, I mean, if you're running into a battle naked, you're going to die. So it's just like, what do you expect to happen? Which I think is why apologetics is important, and why currently I do think we see sort of a resurgence of apologetics and the importance of that right now. What is that organization? Stand for Truth or something? I forget exactly what it is.
Stand to Reason.
Stand to Reason, I think, is why they're doing, like, they've kind of popped off a little bit, because people are looking, and they sort of are one of the more forefront organizations that are really trying to train, especially youth. And they have a whole youth thing. Train people how to do apologetics.
Our youth have gone to that conference a few times, actually, and they're going again in October. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that they're doing good work in that regard of saying, hey, here's something we were lacking in. Let's sort of make a big push for it, because it is important. So,
yeah. And so presuppositional apologetics isn't the only answer, right? And like you were talking about earlier, the one of the things that you have to do as a believer. So one of the arguments, let me say this, one of the arguments against presuppositionalism would be that, but look at what Paul did, right? He looked at the context he was in. He saw the tribute statue idol, essentially, to the unknown God, and then worked with that framework. So that's one of the arguments against that you'll run into. However, I think that the important thing is to understand what you alluded to earlier, is that you can't just run in cold to every conversation. Like, one of your presuppositions can't be that you know exactly everything about that person, how to speak to them, how they're going to take it, if you're going, so when someone asks an apologetics question, age of the earth, whatever, you can pretty much tell by their mannerisms, just with some basic discernment ability, their mannerisms, the tone of the question. You can pretty much tell if they're baiting you, if they actually hate you and they want to, or if it's a sincere, like, I just don't understand, the argument or what. And in that case, yeah, let's talk about the evidence for that, and what we have. Um, but it should always lead back. Like, you should always, at some point, if you're going to talk about evidence at all, you should always be able to lead back to. But that's actually the difficulty that you're having with that is actually not your problem. The problem that you have is a moral problem. It's a problem that the scriptures say that God. Everybody knows God, and that you are suppressing the truth. That's what that God. There's evidence for God everywhere, and so anyway, like, I think that there's a place. Let me say it that way. There is a place for some evidential apologetic framework, but it should always, essentially, in my mind, it should always lead back to presuppositional apologetics, or expository apologetics, kind of a thing. Like, it should always lead back to the word, because the word tells us that they know.
So just to kind of
Yeah,
interject there, I think
yeah,
even if you're using Paul as an example, Mars Hill, all of that, you have, even though he says, hey, here's a statue to an unknown God, and you worship them, and then he automatically takes it back to, hey, that's Jesus. And then leads it back to the Old Testament, where God has preordained where you are, and the boundaries in which you're set. So really what he does, I mean, he just says, hey, this thing over here that you're worshiping amongst everything else, and you're not sure who that is, it really uses that just as a doorway in to, hey, this God this unknown God, hey, that's actually Jesus. Hey, you know who Jesus is? He's the God of the creation that made all things. And then uses that as sort of a doorway, which I think, again, in my uneducated opinion, is still presuppositional apologetics, in regards to saying, like, all I'm doing is using this as a door to say, hey, this thing this question you're asking does tie into the scriptures, whether you know it or not, which is exactly what you just said, which is this idea of, like, I'm just saying, so you have a marriage problem. Maybe if we want to go real basic, right? Well, that marriage problem is probably because you're not operating within the design that God has set forth for marriage, yada, yada, yada. Let's go back to the scriptures. So I think it all, for me, again, I'm not educated in this or an expert in this, but it all goes back to this presuppositional, because even Paul on Mars Hill arguing makes a pretty direct line from this thing that you guys know about over to here. Or even when he quotes philosophers they know, he automatically anchors that in what you've already talked about with Romans. Like, you know the truth, you're just not sure of where it's coming from. So I think, I mean, that's a great example, I think, of how to do apologetics. If you want to throw all the titles out, like what's the best one or whatever, is the idea of saying, what's the end? Where does it connect to the scriptures? And then let's talk about who Jesus is based upon that.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, my presupposition always, my presupposition always has to be that God is God, that He has spoken in His Word, that His Word includes the 66 books of the Bible that we carry, the Old and the New Testaments, and that those 66 books, by miraculous means that only God could have pulled off, are exactly what He wanted to say, written by the pens of men, and that because of that, because it's God breathed, because of that, it's infallible, it's perfect, it's inerrant, it is without contradiction. So so that presupposition leads me as a Christian to, like, when I see something in Scripture that goes, huh, that looks like a contradiction, right? So my response to that can't be, oh, well, it contradicts itself. It can't be. My response to that is always, and it just is, my personal response when I see things like that in the Scriptures is not to assume, oh man, what do I do about this? My response is, how am I to understand this? What is it actually saying? In men's Bible study just yesterday morning, um, we're in Romans, and we're in chapter 2, and there's a point when he's essentially saying nobody has an excuse, and he references to the Jew first and also to the Greek, and then the very next sentence, the very next phrase is, for God is impartial, like God is not partial. And so you have a distinction made with the Jew first and also the Greek, and then the very next phrase says that God is not partial. Like, so as an unbeliever, you might read that and go, this is a contradiction, like one right after the other. What do you know? But as the Christian, I look at that and say, okay, well, what's he saying, right? um
Well,
Christians
just
have to begin with that presupposition.
as just someone that reads literature, no, if you're being genuine with any letter, even if you're not talking about Romans, you're not going to look. I mean, just Harry Potter. You're not going to like pull it up and be like, "Well, J.K. Rowling, when she wrote this, had cognitive dissonance, and she did." No, it's literature. You deal with it as you would in that regard. You're saying, okay, well, clearly, what did he mean here when he wrote it? That's the crazy thing, that even people that deal with, they're like, well, I can't think of an argument I've heard recently, but the idea being really behind it is that, well, these, in your example specifically, let's go to that. He's contradicting himself, and I'm going, how do you read everything else then? Like you're coming so partial to the Bible that you're not even able to see that you wouldn't approach any other literature this way, whether you think it's inerrant or not is beyond that. That's a secondary question at that point. You're just saying like just read it and you use good just reading comprehension. And I'm terrible at that, and I know that. Read good reading comprehension to say, okay, well, clearly he's trying to say something here. What is he saying? So I'm sorry. I just had to break in and say that because I think oftentimes people just don't use good reading comprehension when approaching the text. And we bring so many lenses to it that whether, sometimes you love it so much you're not even able to critique it. And then other times you hate it so much that that's all you want to do. And if you got to come to it honestly and say, look, if there is something here that needs to be reasoned through, I need to be able to be honest enough to do it, whichever side I'm coming from, and get to that. But anyway, that always strikes me as hilarious, is that some people on either side are like just completely unable to use reading comprehension when approaching the text.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, most of the time when someone's reading a book, I think a lot of times people just assume truth. So like if I'm reading some sort of history book about the 14th century or whatever, and it's just some history book or the writings of so and so, I'm automatically doing that kind of thing. I'm assuming that this is true, or if it's like a set of letters written from somebody to somebody else, you know the setting, you know the context, like from the get go, and you treat it as such. But the scriptures, nobody does that. Same thing to them, and so like I think that if I was going to sum things up, if I were going to sum things up in my mind, presuppositional apologetics is the best form of apologetics as far as I'm concerned. Now, the way that some people play that, so it doesn't mean that every person that that exercises presuppositional apologetics does it well or effectively or with a heart of flesh and not like a heart of attacking them just to call them fools. Um, however, as far as tactic, it seems to me to make the most sense, even if you begin briefly with some sort of evidential moment where you say, well, I can answer that question easily. It's this, but that's not really your core problem. The core problem that you and every other human has is blah, 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 gospel, right? And so that would be my, I guess, 2 cents, if that's worth 2 cents, but.
No, well, and I would agree. I think anytime we're approaching it, I think sometimes people get hung up on the big word apologetics, and they're just like, "Oh, I can't do that. I don't have time for that." And I think at the end of the day, just ignore, if that's the issue, ignore the word and just say, "Okay, well, like, how are you engaging with people for the gospel then?" That's apologetics. So go ahead and I think as believers, just say, "How do I approach people? How can I learn to do this better? And at the end of the day, how can I do it ultimately for the glory of God and the expansion of his kingdom?" And that be your goal. You're not going to be good at it all the time. There's going to be times that you absolutely suck at it, and that's okay. Like, just approach people with the gospel and reason with them. And part of that is you learning to reason with yourself through things, being okay that you're not going to know all the answers, and then engaging anyway. There are a lot, and here's the thing, the more conversations you get in with people, the better you're going to be at this, because what you're going to see, like you alluded to earlier, you're going to get the same questions over and over and over again. Like, there's not a whole, like, a huge Rolodex of things that people have. It's usually the basic, like, 12 or so. And as you engage in them, you're going to learn more. You're going to get better at this. You're going to be able to really foundation, like, sort of solidify your belief system on them, and therefore be able to communicate them better. And secondly, to sort of end this, going back to what you said earlier, you have to realize that the reasoning is not the things that save somebody. God may very well use the reasoning to plant a seed of faith in someone that eventually leads to salvation. But there's no argument that's going to save anybody's soul. It's just that thought process. And I'll end with this. My goal is never to change anybody's mind. It's just to get them thinking about something. Because if I can get you thinking about it, I can live in your head rent-free forever. Because that's going to be the thing you're going to have to deal with. Not proving me wrong, not sounding smarter, but you're going to have to at least answer the question. And so if I can get you thinking about something, that's my goal. If I can get you ultimately thinking about who is this Jesus and what does it have to, at the intersection of what everything we're talking about, that's the goal for me. Is to get you really having to think about who Jesus is and what does that mean in regards to hell, the flood, creation, whatever it is. How does Jesus intersect with that? And I think that's the ultimate goal of apologetics, is to make a reason for the faith, specifically Jesus. So,
yeah, and I would, as a very last statement from me, I want to, based on something that you said earlier about deconstructionism and that sort of thing, I just want to encourage, not even encourage, but just like push parents to train your, like, part of training your children up in the way that they should go is training them up in such a way that they're ready to engage with all of these ideas. Mm-hmm. Not that you necessarily have to be the expert in all of these ideas, but if you have sent your child off to college at whatever age, and they're not ready for what, at least intellectually, right? Not every person's children are going to be Christians by the time you send them off to college. That, but if they're not at least intellectually ready to engage with the stuff they're going to be hearing, then you have failed. Um, and you know, not that it's beyond repair. I mean, God is gracious and merciful in all things, and He's got obviously the power to help and change perspectives and that sort of thing. Um, but I would just say that uh, Romans 1:18-22 is an important bit of scripture for parents training their children up. You want to train them and show them what they'll be confronted with, um, and at the same time, you want them to understand that they're only being confronted with these kind of issues, mainly, at least from the secular point of view, from the unbeliever's standpoint, they're only asking these questions because of Romans 1:18-22, and that it's not really the question that they need answered. It's the ultimate problem that they need an answer for, and that's their sin against a holy God.
All right, good deal. Well, hopefully this podcast was helpful to you. Thank you if you've stuck all the way to the end. Gold star for you. What do you use specifically? Just a question for you to maybe in the comment section below. What version of apologetics do you use? Did you even know before this podcast that there were different apologetics? That'd be an interesting question. So if that is, go ahead and comment below. Be very interested, because as you could tell, I'm not super versed in it. So that would be interesting to see where you come from. So if you liked it, go ahead and, what do they call that on the YouTubes? Smash the like button. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Or if you don't want to watch the R2, well, it's really the standard of manliness. If you don't want to watch our faces on YouTube, you can also listen on the audio version as well on all of the platforms. Go and check that out. Yeah, if you don't want to see the beautiful beards, well, it's your loss, but you can listen in the car. So we'll talk to you next week. Have a good one.
See ya.